The Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast.
It is September 4th, 2023, and welcome to the Knuckleheads of Liberty, where we are bringing you the people and the organizations fighting for liberty around the country and in your region. And if you'd like us to focus on a show in your region, certainly go to our website or go to Facebook, send us suggestions. But today we're going to Indianapolis or Indiana, and we're going to be talking to Cecil Bohanon. He is a professor of economics, and so we're going to kind of hear some of his experience. He's also a columnist, too, with his colleague John Horowitz in the Indiana Business Journal. So he has a column there that comes out weekly as well. But before we get into all that, let me introduce you to the rest of the panel. In our lower left-hand corner, we have Leon, the word Brathwaite, last word in Liberty. He is a retired engineer in the state of California. In our lower right-hand corner, we have Cecil Bohanon with us. And my name's Jason McPhee, and I'll be your host today. Let's jump right into it. Cecil, you are, let me bring up the web pages real quick. So here's a description page of you real quick. This is over at Heartland, but it shows you being a professor of economics at Ball State. And here is the Indianapolis Business Journal page that shows a lot of your columns there. And here is a link to Ball State University. So, Cecil, did you want to tell us real quick, I guess, how you how you came about discovering a value for liberty?
Gee, I guess I had a great advantage. I was born in a Goldwater household. My father was a big aficionado of Barry Goldwater, and he was a sacred character in my childhood. And Goldwater wasn't exactly a libertarian, but he certainly had those kinds of inklings. And that was something that sort of got me started. Interestingly, Goldwater has Muncie, Indiana connections. I wasn't born in Muncie, Indiana. I was born in Muskogee, Oklahoma. Now, no, both cities start with MU. Both of them have big glass companies, been part of it. So I guess I was just fated. And the church I go to, Grace Episcopal, is a very holy shrine because that's where Barry Goldwater got married. So I guess it starts with Barry Goldwater. Ends up when I was in high school, I guess I have one memory I could sort of share. I never forget when I was out in my high school woods smoking a tobacco cigarette, which we weren't supposed to smoke. And I just got my first check being a door-to-door salesman. And I thought it was just outrageous. Anybody could tell me what I could put in my lungs. And I also thought it was outrageous that the federal government was taking out Social Security. They didn't need to do that for me. I could do that on my own. So that's probably gives the instincts I came from. During high school, though, I sort of became a progressive, made that move from being a classical liberal to a progressive, and was one of the few people on the block in Oklahoma really for George McGovern. And I was a McGovernite. And because I was a McGovernite, I wanted to get out of provincial Oklahoma, go someplace else. So I wanted to be a professional peacenik. That was kind of my goal. So I went to a Quaker college in Ohio. And over the time frame, I managed to study enough economics and kind of got reeled back in to classical liberal perspective. I guess a highlight there is back in 1976, when I popped on the radio and heard Roger McBride, who was the Libertarian candidate for president, give a presentation on the radio station out of Yellow Springs, Ohio. And he convinced me that free markets and limited government, and also at that time, of course, anti-militarism was a big part of the platform of libertarians, and still is in some sense. Make America a giant Switzerland, and that really appealed to me at the time. So by that time, I was pretty much convinced.
So do you now consider yourself a libertarian?
I think I prefer to be called a classical liberal, because libertarian has kind of a hard edge on it, and often means a lot of different things to different people. Some of which I wouldn't completely identify with. I managed to be exposed in my undergraduate training at good old lefty Wilmington College, though, to the public choice school of economics. I had a professor there who'd studied at Virginia Tech, and I read Jim Buchanan's book, Limits of Liberty, and that's when it was done. I went to Virginia Tech, studied under Buchanan, Tulloch, other sort of luminaries of public choice, which at the time we didn't know they were luminaries of the public choice, but they did. And that sort of made what I was. And I sort of became sort of a full-blown. I prefer Leon classical liberal because it gives you a lot more flexibility. You're not quite so rigid. Kind of the difference between David Friedman, who I respect and think the world of, who thinks of himself as being very much an anarcho-libertarian, compared to his father, Milton Friedman, who was more of a classical liberal. I'd be more on Milton's side.
And just for our audience too out there, in case you're not familiar with these things, so an anarcho-libertarian is one who thinks like we could literally get rid of all government. Exactly. And somebody like Milton Friedman, who might be more of a classical liberal, he thinks there's some roles for government, but we just need to really get them small and minimal.
Precisely. So it's interesting in Milton Friedman's Capitalism Freedom, he said the role of government can never be once and for all defined. It's something that's going to evolve. And that's part of classical liberalism. It is open to, shall we say, certain changes and flexibility. And that's good. The point that he would make is the progressive just went crazy. They came out of classical liberalism. There's no question of that. But then they just went nuts. And basically, well, the state can manage everything because we have modern management techniques, and this whole invisible hand stuff, just phooey, that's old stuff. And now that we're in a industrialized world, that doesn't work anymore, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, I think what history's shown us is that it works better than ever. And I'm convinced that's true in the information age, too, that freedom and free exchange and not trying to plan from the top and direct the economy, it's one, not possible, never feasible, and always has bad consequences.
Well, real quickly on one thing I just wanted to jump in on real quick on something you said with Milton Friedman and the evolution of these things is that, certainly with libertarians, it's all about property rights. I mean, that's sort of where everything comes down to. But, one of the examples Milton Friedman gave is the idea of, who owns the air above your house type of thing. And so the idea is at one point that was irrelevant. You didn't need to worry about it. But then at some point, people started flying and floating things over your house. And then at that point, well, okay, now we have to go and refine that definition of whatever a property right is. So
Yeah, and I think that's right. One of the things I teach in my economics class, and I think this is core economics, property rights are something that evolve over time, and they fit the circumstance. And property rights 1,000 years ago aren't the same as what they are today. There's a lot of components to property rights, all necessary to make an economy function. But that's a central point. The sort of, shall I say, sanctity of private property is, I think, important for an economy to operate, and I think a bedrock of classical liberal thinking.
I just want to step back for a second about the concept of the evolution of government. I get scary when we hear terms like evolution of government. I really do. I did read Friedman's book where he made his point about that. But I always wonder if government can evolve as is being claimed here. Where are the limits of government?
That's a wonderful point, Leon. Again, that's what got me into economics was Jim Buchanan's books, The Limits of Liberty. And it becomes the limits of government. How can a constitution be something that constrains government? And I think that's the only way you can do it. One of my favorite political economists of all time is Manker Olson. And he made the argument that what government really constitutes anthropologically are stationary bandits. You have these bandits that go around, they rove. Well, once the bandit becomes stationary within the confines of the domain they have control over, they're going to try to steal as much as they can. But they have an incentive to make sure there's some productive activity, because you have to have some productive activity so you can engage in theft. And you also want to keep other bandits out. So you do kind of give law and order, and you begin to respect things like private property rights, not because you're beneficent or you have some high ideals, but because it's revenue maximizing for you as a stationary bandit. And I think that's a very good model, sort of what government is. And the question is, can we use this thing called democracy, this great tradition that's developed almost happenstance by accident that we happen to be part of, that says, no, we can limit government. We can limit government. I think one of the 1381, when was it? Parliament told the king in England, You can't raise taxes without our permission. That was an enormous achievement, in human history. And we fortunately are heirs to that. The notion that the king can't just do anything he wants. Well, everybody else in the world, they could somehow or another. In the English-speaking world, we kind of got out of that, or at least had some constraint on it, and that's good. That's I think what we're defending and promoting. That's where classical liberals and I think conservatives have a lot in common, is they recognize that history matters.
Well, it's funny when you mention stationary bandits. It sounds strikingly like a protection racket, like something you might see on The Sopranos.
Oh gosh, yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a nice business. It'd be shame if something happened to it.
Oh yeah. In my economics course, my Econ 201 course, one of the first things I say is free markets are not mafia. But boy, mafia looks a lot like government.
Yeah.
And, can we constrain it to be something else? And I think that's the point. This is where I think David Friedman's wrong, Milton Friedman's right. I think, David Friedman will say it's competing protection firms. I just see that as just bloody anarchy. You just have all these different, groups that are shaking people down like they do in El Salvador until recently, like they do in Haiti, and they've done all kinds of places in the world. You just have these bandits competing with one another. There's one area where monopoly might not be a bad idea. You only have one bandit, one rule of law. That's probably not a bad idea, I think. And again, I respect my anarcho-libertarian friends, but I just think they're wrong on that. I think you have to have some minimal function of the state, and only one state. I think that's the only way things can work.
Yes. Well, Cecil, points well taken. But do you think that our current system, the constitutional republic that we are supposed to be living in here, are we moving too far away from the vision of our founders about having a limited government with maximum liberty for its citizens?
This is what concerns me, Leon, is I'm concerned that the sort of logic of the modern world, democratic politics, is going to take that away. That just as, we criticize the socialists when they say, well, that wasn't real socialism. You can criticize libertarians or classical liberals. Well, that wasn't real classical liberalism. Is classical liberalism and limits to government viable? Or is it always going to be the case? You're never going to have, quote, some kind of pure, true free market capitalism. You're always going to have some form of crony capitalism. And maybe the best we can do is limit that, but I'm not sure how, because constitutions aren't any better than courts and communities that are willing to enforce them. I think that's the big secret, is that you write anything you want on paper. It's getting people to actually follow it is the issue. And I don't know, the more I study constitutional law, the more confused I become. And what it seems to me is, what's the Constitution? It's what the Supreme Court says it is at this point in time. And then ultimately that becomes what law professors are churning in law schools, is what they think the Constitution is. And I think I have a vision of what the American Constitution is. It is supposed to limit government and give its powers. But it's been so used to do all kinds of other things that, is that going to be viable? I don't know. I hope so.
Okay.
Well, it's certainly, we saw this all challenged with COVID times and everything else, where it just seemed like things were up in the air, and it didn't seem like things we thought were in valuable rights, I guess, to things like speech. Suddenly the government is going in there and both covertly and overtly trying to silence us. So
I know.
Yeah.
It's
just before COVID, Cecil, Jason and I and James were on a show, a public access show, and we were arguing if it was constitutional or whether it was illegal to quarantine sick people.
Mm-hmm.
And that was our last show just before COVID. And lo and behold, a few weeks later, we were talking about quarantine all people, sick or not.
Mm-hmm.
It was just a dramatic thing in our eyes. I guess Jason can speak for himself to see.
Well,
Go ahead, Jason. Go ahead.
Well, no, I was just going to say, we thought we were ahead of the curve talking about quarantining sick people.
Exactly.
And the idea that they just went all out and said, no, we're quarantining everybody.
was
Oh,
was amazing. And this gets back to the whole discussion we're having about this evolution of government. So if we have no limits, government can evolve into anything, either evolve into something good, which it never does, or evolve into a monster that takes away all our liberties, as they did during the COVID, essentially.
Well, this is the thing that again gets my attention. Nobody out there is arguing for smaller government. And that position that the Libertarian Party always took is just, you used to have a constituency in the Republican Party that would say constrain spending, but that's gone. I mean, they'll say
it's a sliver,
and they'll talk about it, but they won't do it.
Yes.
No one's going to say what Grover Cleveland said, and he was a Democrat, by the way, but he was a classical liberal, that no, it's very sad that farmers in Texas had a drought, but it's not the job of the government to take care of them.
No.
The whole idea is that endless entitlements for everybody all the time are part of our birthright as Americans, whereas that's not what I was raised with or I was led to believe. Because you don't want to seem mean. You don't want to seem mean to the old people or to sick people or to people that are poor. Where are the libertarians that are arguing for let's eliminate food stamps? We used to do that, but now nobody does that. It's now become sort of the ethic of government should take care of everybody all the time whenever they're in problem. And that's a prescription for disaster. I don't know. I'm not sure I put this up, but do you know who Daniel DiMartino is?
No.
I definitely, I've heard the name, but I can't remember.
He is a Venezuelan refugee, and he came to the United States, and he's studying to get his PhD at Columbia. And if anybody is open to the idea of immigrants coming in and having a shot in the United States, it'll be Daniel. And again, I think that's something that classical liberals are for. Unlike conservatives, we welcome foreigners. We think it's great. We just don't want to put them all on welfare. That's the whole point, because welfare is not good for us. It's not good for them either.
It's not good for anybody, man. It's a disease of dependency.
Precisely not. And he made the point. He went to one of the hotels. He's in Columbia University, and he's working for Manhattan Institute. And he did a report on Venezuelan migrants that were in New York City. And of course, it's a mess there. And he made the point that as much as you want to think it's compassionate, to how did he say it? Was something like, New York City on its own cannot provide a guarantee shelter for all the oppressed of the world. No country can. And that's part of it is, have we gotten so generous that we think, of course, it's never my generosity. It's Bill Gates's generosity. We're going to tax all those rich people, and that's how we're going to take care of all the poor and oppressed of the world.
Yeah, it's that endless virtue signal of reaching into somebody else's pocket.
Right. And I think that's the constraint there. As Margaret Thatcher said, at some point you run out of other people's money. Yes. And if we look at the CBO projections, we're very quickly running out of other people's money, and nobody seems to care about it. Used to be Republicans would scream about it. At least some Republicans would. Now they're all saying, no, let's not worry about that. Social Security's a right. I guess I should have caught wind of this years ago. Mike Pence, who, of course, I've known him in Indiana for a long time. I knew him before he was famous. Once as a congressman, was on a stage with me, and he said he thought Social Security was a sacred contract between the government and the people, and it could never be violated. And of course, I took exception to that. I think it's an entitlement, an ill-conceived entitlement. It was a big problem, and we should be trying to evolve our way out of it. But nobody's arguing that anymore. Nobody's arguing that. In fact, you're considered to be mean and nasty if you even think that.
Well, even guys like who are kind of purists, almost like Ron Paul, when he was there, it was sort of like, well, this problem has gotten so big. Let's deal with sort of the biggest problem first, which is to sort of pull the military back a little bit. And then we can use some of those savings to shore up, our entitlements as we try to reduce them gradually. But it's like you to say you're going to go after those right at the beginning is political suicide.
Right. So. I mean, and I think that's the thing that gets to Leon's big point is, can we preserve it? Well, you got to do it through the political process, and most things that change in a political process are things that are going to happen gradually.
Yeah.
And it doesn't happen all at once. This whole notion that everybody is supposed to be taken care of by the government would be anathema 100 years ago to lots of people. Now it's standard. 50 years ago, there were a lot of people that argued, no, it's not the job of the government to take care of the people. Now that's considered, wow, you're way off on, you're so antiquated. What can you say?
I think maybe part of the reason is because of what people have been learning in the universities and through the educational system.
Right.
And I actually wanted to bring you back to that just a little bit. And one of the things that struck me too that you said is that you started out sort of believing in liberty, then you went to school and they sort of turned you into progressive, and then luckily you found economics and came back.
Right, exactly. Exactly.
What was it that caused you to want to study or to become a professor in economics? And have you, as you've been teaching economics, have you seen a change at the universities over your tenure? I mean, have you been teaching economics? Is it for about 20 years?
43 years now.
I'm 44.
I'm going to my 44th year teaching principles of economics, and I'm really happy doing it. It's interesting you say that, Jason, because Indiana is, quote, got this sort of libertarian streak through it that some states don't have. So you're always going to have a cadre of students that are sympathetic to sort of libertarian points of view. I don't like to think that I use my economics class as a launching point for libertarian philosophy, because I don't think that's right. I don't think you should teach economics. And economics is supply and demand. Now, there's certain things like property rights, certain things like marginal analysis that sort of fit into a freedom framework. But you don't like to use your class to do that. Nevertheless, I like to sort of have my cards open. Yeah, I'm classical liberal. I'll let everybody know that. In my columns, I'll say I'm a classical liberal. Not all economists are. But economics should be about, as Walter Williams would say, a core of sort of set ideas about how the world operates and how those all work out. And that's what I try to stick to when I teach economics. But the climate of liberty at Ball State, what can you say? Ball State's a second-tier university. So it's not Ivy League, certainly. It's not even big state university. So there's a little more freedom and a little more openness here. We don't get all the bad things that come out of the Ivy League until 5 or 6 years later. It takes a while for it to trickle down to Ball State. And
just as an insertion here, I'm in Sacramento, and it feels like it always takes a few years for every bad idea from the Bay Area.
Yeah. And that's what it feels like here at Ball State. That's what it feels like at Ball State happens. But it does happen because outside the economics department, there's not a whole lot of classical liberals on campus. You'll get a few in political science. In my 40 years here, there have been a few in English, a few all kinds of different places. But again, the overarching ethos of higher education is increasingly, but it's always been rather progressive. And sometimes what you find is libertarians will be seen as, they're amusing sidebars for the progressive agenda. Because there's some things that libertarians will generally agree with progressives on, but a lot of things that they won't. And then it's kind of like, oh, well, you're just a harsh libertarian. You're called all kinds of things by people like that. But I can't say that there's been any sort of, shall I say, raft persecution at my university for being classical liberal. And there's always been students that are interested and faculty that are also interested. But it's not the ethos. It's not, higher education is sort of lock, stock, and barrel owned by the progressives. And
so in the 44 years that you have been teaching, Cecil, at Ball State, I presume your whole career was there.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so what have you seen in terms of the transformation of, say, your faculty colleagues in terms of the political viewpoints or the political positions that they have taken? Have it always been this large infection of progressivism, or is that being a gradual change?
I think it has, Leon. I would assume that again, outside the economics department, one of the reasons I came to the Ball State economics department is there were several sort of like-minded people in sort of classical liberal public choice scholarship. There were people that were interested in that. So we have kind of a reputation on campus, indeed, a reputation around the state. Oh, those are those crazy free market people over at Ball State in the economics department. But not even the College of Business is so free market anymore. Colleges of business, especially management departments, in some sense marketing departments, will very much just sort of buy into, shall I say, progressive speak and sort of go into it. I think that's gotten, quote, a little bit worse in the sense that progressive speak is a little more part of the, it's just assumed. It's just, now this was 30 years ago, but I never forget when President Clinton got elected. And one of the things Hillary Clinton wanted to do, of course, is put together Hillary Care, which was a sort of Obamacare light, something like that. And I was asked to be on a panel on that. And it was a couple of people from the English department, somebody from health, somebody from somewhere. And one of the my colleagues on the panel said, well, no, we're all for this, aren't we? We're all for this change. I mean, nobody's against this, is there? And it was just assumed, because she was an English professor, that, well, anybody in their right mind sees that we have to go to some socialized system of medicine. How can you assume anything else? And that's part of what, again, that was 30 years ago. And I don't think that's changed much. It has become perhaps a bit more strident. It can become a little more nasty, too.
Yeah.
I think that's the whole thing. The cancel culture thing can be nasty. You can, all kinds of things can happen that maybe wouldn't have happened because people had better manners 30 years ago.
That's true. That's true.
Well, it's funny on that trend that you noted too. It seems to be echoed by Jonathan Haidt in some of his discussions where he's talked about social science studies. They seem to be maybe they used to be 70-30 on campuses of progressives to sort of conservatives. Now it's literally like 20-1, except maybe in economics. But even economics, it sounds like you guys are sort of the last holdout.
There's something like that. There's something like that. But no, traditionally, again, Jason, most economists haven't been that libertarian. Most economists would understand a free market and have certain sympathies for it. And that's one of the things I think economics will do. But most economists have and always have been registered Democrats and are, much more interested in trying to figure out how to expand the welfare state than contract it.
Yes, that's true.
Well, we're just about out of time with our public access audience because we send the first half of the show there, but the conversation is going to continue online. So I just wanted to let you know, if you're watching on public access at this time, go check us out online and you can hear all the interesting things we're going to continue to talk with Cecil about what's the role of a classical liberal nowadays, things that are going on with the drug war and the state of our economy and such. So if you want to catch the rest of that, go check us out. Spotify, Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, Knuckleheads of Liberty. Go check us out there. Okay, well, back to the show. So go ahead with whatever you were right in the middle of, Cecil.
Gosh, what was I right in the middle of? Well, again, it seems like lean times for classical liberals, but we've been through lean times before, and I think that's an important thing to understand, that when progressivism, and I'll use sort of some inflammatory language here, reared its ugly head in the 1880s and 1890s, everybody was saying, okay, this whole Adam Smith stuff, it's gone. Free markets don't work. We have to have the heavy hand of government. We need all these reforms. And you certainly have got the progressive movement. That continued on until 1920s when it kind of swung back the other way. And then again, classical liberals, one of my favorite classical liberals, I'm not sure if he's a classical liberal, but I think he is, Calvin Coolidge.
Mm-hmm.
But he was a classical liberal that was anchored to, I think, some of the common sense that's necessary to have a functioning economy and functioning society. How many politicians would do this? Here's a quote I have from Calvin Coolidge. There is no dignity quite so impressive and no independence quite so important as living within your means. And he said that like 1923. And the idea is, except in exceptional circumstances, no one's supposed to live off the government, whether it's a big corporation, whether it's workers. Whereas now we have an ethic that says, the bottom 50% of folks in the income earning class shouldn't pay any taxes at all. And if anything, they should get additional compensation for just not earning much money.
Yeah.
And that sounds very nice. It sounds very sweet, but you can't save everybody in the world by trying to help them.
Yeah.
I don't know of any economic growth that occurs in any economy because you just hand out money to people. What you hope is that individuals can be free and autonomous and self-sufficient. And I think that's an ethic of liberty that is necessary to reestablish, but I don't think anybody believes it. Mike Pence thinks that Social Security is your entitlement. I don't think it is, right? That you have a right to health care. New York City says you have a right to shelter. Well, no, you don't. My mom told me, what do you have a right to, Cecil? Whatever you earn. That's it. Here's a blank piece of paper. That's what your rights are. Your rights are basically negative rights, not positive rights. Once you start saying that rights constitute my claim on your pocketbook, except in some very sort of limited ways, I think that's the problem. The whole notion of the positive rights that people are owed something is problematic.
Sorry, Leon, just for our audience to break in real quick. So that negative rights essentially means anything that it doesn't require somebody else to do something for you.
Precisely.
Whereas the positive right allow you to reach in and demand somebody else do something
Good
for
distinction.
you. So.
Yeah, I think it's attributable to Isaiah Berlin. He made the distinction. And by the way, he actually believed there should be positive rights. But he made the point, the right to be left alone, the right to worship as you please, my right to free speech, our right to do this, right? Yeah. On our own dime. That's a negative right. Someone cannot come and shut us down. But it's a different thing when we say the public sector has to pay Jason a stipend to run this show because we need more public access television and the government should pay for that. You know,
it's my right to run this show and have you pay for it.
And you pay for it. I can write whatever I want and you have to pay for the crayons. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, you pay for your own damn crayons. That's fine. You know, you can say anything you want. But those, I think, are the basic rights that our founders had in mind. And I think they're the rights that make an economy operate. It's a good debate as to what do we do when people are in great distress. I mean, I'm not terribly offended by National Guard going in and cleaning up things after there's a terrible hurricane and public funds being allocated to help people in times of stress. That might be something I'd buy into. I mean, it's not strictly libertarian. That's why I prefer to be called the classical liberal. A strict libertarian will get all upset about, well, we're giving money to people when there's a hurricane. Classical liberals not going to worry about that too much and just say, well, that's probably the best way we can do it. We'd like to have private agencies do all this, but sometimes the public sector may be able to come in and do some things.
Yeah, I think this is where I really do differ with libertarians, and truly, because I do not see anything wrong with a temporary allocation of funds, public funds, to help people through difficult times, whether it's a hurricane or even if somebody lost a job on Friday and they need some help over the next over the say a month or two or whatever it is to try to get them back on the feet. I don't see anything that. My problem is when it gets into where people are actually sitting around and waiting for somebody else to go to work to maintain their standard of living. I mean, for someone who have grown up in the Christian faith, I mean, the sixth commandment told us 6 days we shall work, and the 10th commandment tells us we should not covet our neighbor's stuff.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So and that 10th commandment, people don't even understand it. That's about property rights. That's what we're talking about. Sure. That you having claims on other people's stuff. So if we go back to those fundamentals, whether you grew up in the Christian faith or just through natural thinking, you will see the dangers of the dependency that government creates when they allow people to sit at home or allow corporations to be subsidized in their activities. It's really create a disease of dependency that is really destructive for society.
Well, it's destructive for society, Leon, for a couple of reasons. One, it's going to bankrupt us. That's what we have now. It's going to bankrupt us. And we can see this with the CBO numbers that we've looked at. that we're going to this cliff. Everybody knows it, but nobody's doing anything about it.
And real quick, while you're talking, Cecil, let me bring up a graphic. We're going to bring this up
Yes,
just a little later in the show, but this is the CBO, the Congressional Budget Office, and this is the government numbers. And one of the reasons I like this particular chart is because it shows our debt, the amount of kind of a surrogate on the amount of spending that we've been doing to the relative size of the economy, the GDP, and you can see it's massive. It's gotten to over 100%. And this early spike, that's World War II. So that's like the emergency you guys are talking about, the temporary emergency. Well, this is where we are now, where there's no more temporary emergency. We're headed off into the stratosphere.
Right.
That's the real emergency.
I hope to live to this age, 2053. I'll be 100 or 99 that year, so I hope to make it. But the CBO projections are, if things stay the way they are, federal government revenue is going to be 19% of GDP, which I think is too high, but outlays will be 29% of GDP.
Yeah.
So in that particular year, you're still going to have 10% of American GDP would be a deficit if current rules hold. And there's not a whole lot that can change. You're going to have to do something. And nobody wants to come up with this, because Democrats have learned that if they propose tax increases, they're going to lose. Republicans have learned that if you propose entitlement reductions, you're going to lose. So there's no winning here. And you hope that the public can be smart enough and adult enough to be able to offset that and to see that. But I don't see how we get out of that when nobody on either side of the fence is really willing to do anything about it one way or another. And I think what would be necessary would be some hard-headed, of all places, one of the things progressives love to talk about is how much they love Sweden and how we ought to be like Sweden. Look what Sweden did with their social security system. They basically said, okay, these are the taxes we're going to assess on people that are working. Now, old folks that are in the retirement pool, this is what you get. You don't get anything more. And if we don't get as much revenue, guess what? Your stipend goes down, and that's what's going to happen. Well, that's not this sacred trust. We promised you something, we have to give it. That's a hard-headed, reasonable sort of approach to things by these heroes of the left. Sweden. Of course, Sweden's a country of 10 million people. They can't bankrupt themselves. They're incapable of doing it. They can't. The problem we have is we're such a big country and we can issue so much debt and the world will take it, that we've been able to carry this thing on for years and look like we can do it for another 30 years. But something's going to have to give.
But Cecil, one question I really wanted to touch on with you, being you're a classic liberal and you're economist professor. Philosophically, I understand your point about Social Security. I do, but this Social Security system, as it was envisioned, was where the government has forced us, people who are working. I'm retired now, but people who are working force us into this contractual arrangement whereby we donate into this fund. I know the fund is not in a lockbox like Algo suggested. I know that, but they forced us into this contractual arrangement whereby we've donated this fund that is supposed to be in the lockbox. And when we retire, they will give us a certain amount of money for a certain length, but for the rest of our life is what was envisioned. Now, that to me was some sort of contractual arrangement, even though I don't like the contractual arrangement, but it was forced upon us.
Right.
The question that I have then, even though it was a bad idea from its inception, what do we do about the fact that there are people who are now on the other side of the contract, where they are no longer working and they are receiving the Social Security as part of their income for their existence?
And that's the only income they have.
The system.
Yeah, and that's the only income they have.
Yes,
You can't pull that out. I mean, this is my colleague Marilyn Flowers, who retired several years ago, said the whole problem with reforming Social Security is that the transitional generation, they get screwed because they end up paying into the system and then they don't pull out what everybody else does. And that's political, what should you say? It's political poison. I think the thing you're going to have to do with Social Security at some point is just cap what the benefits are. And I think that'd be a much better way of doing it than the other alternative, which is to raise the tax. You only pay Social Security on the first $141,000 you earn. Okay.
Yeah.
The
Yes.
argument that you could immediately make Social Security solvent is if you just ended that cap. And that would be great because you're taxing the rich. But it's hard for me to believe that a 15% increase on income at that level wouldn't have other consequences. I mean, that's a 15% increase, the marginal tax rate on people that are earning more than $150,000 a year. It's hard for me to believe that's not going to quash enterprise and do things. So I think that's a very bad way of going. I think a better way of doing it is just to say, let's cap Social Security at $2,000 a month. Nobody gets anything more than that. And that would solve the problem. It would give everybody some base entitlement. Another thing that's sort of interesting, Leon, is go back to what President Roosevelt actually said when he signed the law in. He said, this is not meant to be your full retirement. You need to do other things. You need to sock money away. And if you adjust for inflation, the kind of payments that people get in Social Security, they're 2 to 3 times what would originally have been envisioned. Mm-hmm. That what happened is until we ended up indexing Social Security, I believe that was in the 70s, Congress would always raise it. And they always raise it more than what the cost of living would imply, because they always wanted to buy the votes from the old people.
Yes.
And so it became raise that standard of what you get in Social Security roughly between 1935 and 1975. And here's an example of an institution that actually worked. Capping Social Security and its increases to cost of living was one of the wisest things we ever did. Because if you leave it to Congress, they're always going to do it more than that. Mm-hmm. And so that's an example of maybe there's some hope we can get some institutional reforms that keep this beast under control.
Yeah. Well, one of the things too is with government, and this is like when you guys were saying earlier, this idea that you can have some temporary things to jump in there and help people out through some bad times, but there's this information problem, that it's like, well, what's that going to look like in the end? How is this going to happen? How are you going to determine who is the right person and who isn't, and that sort of thing? And so what we saw when Social Security first started, there were some people who got a lot more out of it than what they put in it. I think the first woman who got to draw on it, she drew way more than what she ever put into it, I think. So I can't remember her name, but I
think it was Ida Mae Wells. I've got that in one of my lectures. And put in $75 and lived to be 102 and drew out thousands of dollars. She got a really good deal on that.
Yeah.
She got a good deal at taxpayers' expense. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
But there's also this moral hazard too in jumping in and catastrophes as well, because like we see things where, we've got to jump in and rescue people on some of these things with government instead of with necessarily a private solution. But then suddenly we're sort of distorting the price signal of risk of doing some of these activities that cause people to get into the trouble in the first place, whether it's like building on a coastline that might be flipping into the ocean or something else.
And again,
in an ideal world, Jason, no doubt. I mean, you there are some market distortions that will inevitably occur in almost any concept of how government should function. There are going to be some market distortions. The question is which one of those market distortions we are willing to accept in terms of doing anything functioning as a society. No, I'm not suggesting that we should be out there paying people to sit on their backside at home. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I think there must be some
Leon, it's a slippery slope to being on your backside.
Fair enough. But I think we can design a system with limits on it, as to who should or should not be helped. Honestly, I really think so.
Of course, the other big elephant in the fiscal room is healthcare.
Yes,
we've got that so messed up that we may end up going to a single payer system just because there's no alternative to doing that. But then that'll be a mess too. Wait till healthcare is free. Yeah, then it'll be cost a fortune. That's for sure. But the way it is the system of subsidies just inflates prices and cost, making it unaffordable. And what have you got? You're back to that moral hazard problem, Jason. People will not take advances in their pay or try to build their skills because they're afraid of losing their health care. And what did Obamacare do? It just put more and more people on the welfare system, so to speak. More and more people get public subsidies to support their health care. Nothing's done to constrain it. Some people say, well, you can't have free market health care. And I argue, yeah, you can have free market health care, but we're near that. We've got a system that's kind of the worst of both worlds. It's got all the problems of a market-based healthcare system and all the problems of a socialist-based healthcare system. And it's the most expensive one in the world. And it cannot be sustained.
Well, yeah, and it appears the struggle for limited government is one that almost seems like a quixotic quest, I guess, at this point.
I think that's right. Yeah.
But that does bring up, I guess, another topic we wanted to get into on this, and we've skirted around it a bit. But it seems like classical liberals are really getting squeezed. It doesn't seem like there's very much a home for them anymore. The conservatives seem to be pushing, a little bit hard on some things. The left is it's almost like there's all the things we used to agree with the left on, they seem to be just abandoning, it's as far as like free speech and other things. So I wanted to bring in a few articles. James, maybe you could bring in some articles here. This is an article that was in the American Institute for Economic Research. And here the guy's talking about, there's issues where the left is going in and they're crushing speech. They're trying to sort of force the way we see history. Certainly the kind of things that the right used to do.
The right's responding by doing the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, we see some of the signs of that in Florida, where they're kind of mandating certain types of education. I think a lot of that is sort of a response today, but then you could say what the left is doing might have been a long-term response to what they saw the right doing in the past. So, but it just seems like we're losing a lot of these things to the point where we literally have things that are being proposed like misinformation boards in the Department of Homeland Security. And I actually wanted to bring in a video that we had of that, because I think this is just how crazy bizarre it's getting, where the left literally wants to tell you that they're trying to set the what is right think or true think or whatever. It's almost Orwellian. James, can we get the video for that one?
And a huckster takes some lies and makes them sound precocious by saying them in Congress or a mainstream outlet. So disinformation's origins are slightly less atrocious. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. It's how you hide a little lie. When Rudy Giuliani shared bad intel from Ukraine, or when TikTok influencers say COVID can cause pain, they're laundering disinfo, and we really should take note and not support their lies with our wallet, voice, or vote. Oh!
So believe it or not, that's Nina Jankowicz, and she was the one that Biden wanted to have this this board of misinformation, I guess, within Department of Homeland Security, and she was the one he wanted to put in charge of that. Just essentially singing about the way she wants to crush misinformation. Well, what is misinformation? I mean, that's the whole classical liberal project, is to figure out that we can all try and pursue that on our own to figure out what those truths are, and the idea to have government sort of stepping on that. But then, of course, there's other areas too. Cecil, you shared this article with us where it looks like churches are sort of getting all in on the woke where they have like in this particular thing, the United Methodist Church boasts the first drag queen in the world to become a certified candidate for ordination. A traveling minister who describes drag queen or a drag ministry as divine duty, and so you see a lot of these issues where the churches some churches are actually, I guess, going in I guess they've gotten the government's DEI messages and they're taking it to heart. I don't know.
My take on it is both sides equally err on this. I used to think that classical liberalism was the answer, in the sense that would be viable. When I ran for Congress in 1984 as a libertarian, gosh, that's coming up 40 years ago, there was a gentleman ran for governor, and he was very proud One afternoon, he went to a moral majority meeting and was able to convince them of sort of a classical liberal vision, which is government, keep your hands out of these personal, private, sexual issues. And he was able to convince the moral majority types that that was a good thing because it would protect them. And then later in that evening, he was able to go to the gay liberation group and get their endorsement too. Because the idea is the state should not be in a position of favoring one sort of moral way of living your life compared to another moral way of living your life. State's supposed to stay neutral on that, and then civil society is supposed to resolve that, and we can kind of live and let live. But I'm not sure that's viable anymore. I'm very pessimistic on that. And let me give you a little background here. Back in March, Governor DeSantis had a press conference, and he did something that was just absolutely brilliant. He said, here are books that we're going to take out of Florida libraries, Florida high school libraries, because kids shouldn't see them. And then he quoted passages from them. And then the television anchors and the television stations wouldn't publish that because it ended up offending obscenity codes. They're saying words and saying things that you can't show on television. Well, what a statement. If you can't say it on television, why should our high school kids look at it? Looks like DeSantis wins the point. Looks like conservatives have their point to be made. There's all this trash in high school libraries. Okay. I went and got all 3 of those books. Okay. And what can I say? Was DeSantis grandstanding? Yep, he sure was, I think, for the most part. Here's one called Flame. Okay. Flamer. And it's a story. Yes, there's a couple of passages there. He cherry picked the bad passages. That's not the point of the book. Here's another one called Gender Queer. And it's about a kid wanting to change their gender. I don't see, I might not think that's a good idea. You might not think it's a good idea, but it seems like that was an authentic thing. I don't see any reason high school kids shouldn't watch it. But here's the third one I got. And a lot of it I like. Let's talk about it. It's a sex education book. And it just dawned on me after reading this that there's sort of 2 visions that are competing with one another. And I'm not sure how classical liberalism counters this. When your kid's in school and you're teaching sex education, what do you want them to learn? In this particular book, I can go to the particular passage. Here's what's a relationship. It's dating. How do you get involved? What kind of relationships are you going to be involved in? And of course, this is very explicitly about sexual relations. Now, a lot of people are going to say, I don't want my high school kid told he's supposed to be in a sexual relationship at all. That's not mine. But here's what they say. Romantic relationships come in different flavors. There is no wrong choice. You can explore as many or as few as you fancy. One's a monogamous relation, being exclusive. Second, polyamorous relationship. Third, open relationships, swinging. Next, casual relationships, that is friends with benefits, companionship relationships, and these are all the same. Well, I don't know. You don't have to be a conservative Christian to say that's not what you want as a role model for your kids. And I don't know. I'm probably more liberal than a lot of people on these particular margins, but you can certainly understand how a lot of people are going to object to that as being the basis for sex education for their kids. Now, what's the libertarian answer? Well, you have different school systems and you can choose and pick and choose. But if public funding's involved, then what can you say? Everybody's paying for everybody's school system. And I think that just makes the whole thing intractable. I'm not sure we can even deal with these issues in a way that's workable. I wish the libertarian approach, the classical liberal approach of live and let live would work here, but I don't think anybody's going to accept it.
Well, I was just going to jump into, you kind of touched on what I was going to jump to, which is the idea of, well, just have radical school choice. I mean, allow the government dollars to be spent, but don't put a government standard on it. Just say, hey, look, your kid, it's tied to their backpack. They go where they want to go, and we're not going to set a standard. I know that's kind of the hidden pitfall in a lot of these, is that there will be a government standard, and therefore it's an illusion of choice. But if you could get away from that and just say, hey, look, you want to send your kid to madrasa, you want to send your kid to some sort of math academy. Either way, that's your choice, and then let competition rule which school wins or which version of sex education is the best. So,
Right. Well, but
oh,
on the other hand, what can I say? I mean, I went to another thing to try to get some balance the other way. Here's a lovely group called the Center for Faith, Sexuality, and Gender, and they have they're conservative, they're Christian. You look at the bottom line, though, independent of all the things they're saying, they say, according to God's design and intent, sex difference is an intrinsic part of marriage, and they say all sex outside of marriage is sin. While same-sex marriage is legal in some countries, it does not represent a historical Christian view of marriage. Okay, true enough. Their sex education program is going to be very different than Let's Talk About It. And what can I say? My lesbian friends are going to say, oh, well, you can send your kid to a private school, but if they're teaching that and they're vilifying us, I don't want to pay for it. And the conservative is going to say, well, if you're teaching kids all relationships are the same, and it's fine to be polyamorous, and that's a good thing to do, and that a little porn's not bad for you. You know, conservatives, Christian, Islamic, all kinds are not going to like that either. And as long as public funds are in that, people are going to assume or assert that they've got veto power over those kinds of things. And I just find it to be intractable because I don't think people are willing to put down their guns at this point.
Well, the whole problem is the government involvement in these things, and I don't know why the government should be teaching my kid. Well, I mean, my kids are all grown now, but why they should be teaching my kids sex education at all? Teach them reading, writing, arithmetic. Teach them social studies and all the other things that are necessary for a well-rounded education. But why they have to be teaching? Well, they don't allow. The government is not allowed to teach us anything about any sort of religious things in the schools. Fine, okay, fine. I could understand why that may be the case, but why the sex education? Why is that? Why is that not a role? That is something that parents should be doing with their children.
I agree with you, Leon. It should be done by other institutions, but there are people that are going to want that to be in the schools, and it's going to be very hard to pull them back from that. And with health education and other kinds of social science, I mean, part of it maybe is just school creep, that schools have become now sort of co-parents. And that's part of the problem. That's part of the expansion.
Well, and I actually wanted to jump in on that real quick because I hadn't expected to talk about that. But I actually have kids of school age. And when we talk about the school creep, when COVID hit, the thing they jettisoned first was the actual education. That they jettisoned. But what they didn't jettison was the school lunches. So if your kid was, not going to school, they wanted to make sure they could still show up with a mask on to pick up a lunch.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
wasn't the point the education, but now suddenly it became
it becomes this co-parenting.
Exactly. Sorry.
But again, I think part of the problem here, Leon, and again, it goes way back. In the 1830s, most states ended up putting in their constitution that it's the job of the state to ensure uniform publicly financed education. A great debate I would like to go back and look at again was between the Archbishop of Boston and I believe it was Horace Mann. It could have been another Unitarian minister. And the argument then wasn't whether or not the Bible should be taught. Everybody agreed the Bible should be taught. But the secular side said, you just read the Bible to the kids and let them interpret it. The Bishop of Boston said, no, we can't do that because kids aren't capable of interpreting the Bible. They need somebody to interpret it. And we Catholics are going to do it for our kids. And so what you had is this long march of 100 years plus, where American public education was really Protestant public education. And the Catholics kind of had their own side system. Then all religion kind of got thrown out of schools. And then what did you end up with? You ended up with the mess that we have now, it seems to me. I agree with you, Leon. It would be nice if it was just reading, writing, arithmetic. But can you actually do education without some moral inculcation? Is that possible, or is that central to education? It seems to me it is, but if we've got a society where there's two or a variety of different moral views that are not compatible with one another, how do we do public education? It can't help but become a war. It can't help but become a cultural war. And I'm not sure what classical liberals are supposed to do about it. What we like to say is, well, to each their own, go do your own thing. And if you want to teach your kids, what is it? Let's talk about it kind of sex education curriculum. That's fine. You want to teach a traditional Catholic sex education curriculum. That's fine. But both sides are going to object to the other one. They're going to say, I don't want my tax dollars to promote your homophobia. and I understand. And so I'm kind of in a flux on that. I don't know what to do. The long run solution would be get government completely out of the funding of education. But
that's the David Friedman argument.
Right. But it's too deeply ingrained in our culture and society. It's been ingrained since the 1930s. No, you cannot get up and say, I want to end public education. You'll be considered a nutcase.
And you know, one of the things I think that maybe gives a little bit of a nose under the camel's nose under the tent, I guess, as well, is the fact that we do have laws that restrict young people as well from going out and getting a job. I mean, we say that you're not responsible when you're under 18, so you can't enter into a contract. So if we are going to have restrictions on them, the idea that there might be some benefits at that age too of being able to get an education so that you do become responsible enough to go get a job, maybe those are, I don't know. That's just a little bit of my own personal thoughts on it.
Well, again, my take, I was like what Walter Williams said. He said, I'm for education up to this point. I want every kid to be able to read so they can see the sign on my property that says, stay off my property. And that's the level they want. And that's where public subsidies go. After that, you roll your own, you do whatever. You want to teach, like you were saying, Leon, reading, writing, basic numeracy, that's it. And that's what we're supposed to do. And then the values, well, how do you do education without values? You're going to have that in there. The classical liberal notion is we can all kind of roll our own values. But then the problem is if we're funding it publicly, then everybody's funding everybody else's values, and people get understandably very testy about that.
Yes, it's true. That's right. Yeah.
That is what I kind of like about the radical school choice thing, is at least it allows a sort of a long-term test where, you know, you sort of go to the grocery store and you spend your money and you don't really care about what's in somebody else's basket, you know, and you just really are concerned with what's in your own basket, and eventually those terrible products will just disappear off the shelves.
Sure. A dear progressive friend of mine who passed on, I was arguing that now some religious education in school is not a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with prayer in school, nothing wrong with Bible reading, Bible stuff like that. And I said, would you say that you cannot buy kosher food with your food stamps? And he said, next question. I don't want to deal with that. I think that would be the point, is that you would think people would have the wherewithal to say, I respect what you think, you respect what I think. Let us do that. But on these kinds of issues, people get off, and they're getting increasingly testy. That's the problem. They're increasingly testy about that. And you can understand. If you were raised to believe that sex outside of marriage is wrong, and then you have let's talk about it, and it's telling your kids that no, any kind of sexual relationship's okay, you're gonna be upset about it. I also see if you're a lesbian, or if you're Pete Buttigieg, and your kid's gonna go to school and they're gonna say, well, all sex outside of a heterosexual marriage is wrong, and anybody who does that's a sinner and a terrible person. I can see how Pete and Chasten would be very upset about that.
Yes.
So how do you deal with that? I don't know. I'm getting discouraged about the bill. I used to think classical liberalism, we had the answers there and we could have everybody live peacefully, but I'm not sure that holds anymore.
I mean, you know, and unfortunately, we've kind of gone over an hour at this point, and I'd love to, you know, we did have the drug war, and we wanted to talk about that. But Cecil, if you wouldn't mind coming back on another show, because I feel like that's such a big show.
I'd love to do some more research on the drug war, because I think it's very interesting. It's kind of like on the West Coast. Now, you guys live on the West Coast. I don't.
Oh, yeah.
What I can tell in Portland, Oregon, is about 90% of what the Libertarian Party called for has kind of happened. It's not working too well. And it's something I think we want to turn attention to. And my take on it is, well, if you say you can use drugs, but if you have bad consequences, we're going to help you. And we're going to let you continue to use drugs, and there's no accountability. What do you expect?
Yeah, of course. Exactly.
And I think that's the problem. It's not that the classical liberals were wrong. It's those dang progressives again. They're so nice that they end up enabling people. And that becomes the problem. Drug legalization.
They're always nice with other people's money.
Precisely. You've got it. Right.
Yeah. The worst drug is other people's money.
Yes.
That leads to all the ills of society. It's what you think you could do with other people's money. But, you know, I did want to sort of wrap on a topic that there'll be a pretty brief one, but it sort of goes to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. And there was just a couple weeks ago, there was a guy named Jonah Goldberg, and he was on a CNN show, and he literally said that essentially the problem with democracy is sort of the small voices, or the small donors, and that they should just kind of shut the hell up. And I want to bring in that video. James, can you bring that in for us so we can actually hear it out of it?
A time where there were a lot of people. There was a lot of cheering and self-congratulation about the rise of small donors a decade ago, and now small donors are actually one of the biggest problems for democracy, for the GOP, because large donors actually have a strategic view about moderation, who can win, who can't. Small donors really are just venting their spleen with their credit card, and they lock candidates into positions that can hurt them in a general election.
So I really wanted to bring that up because that seems like a very unclassical liberal thing to say. Hey, only the rich guys.
Very elitist. It sounds very elitist.
He's wacko on that.
Yes.
That's the way I mean. It's small donors Jonah Goldberg doesn't like, that he's got a problem with.
Yeah.
Seems to me. If they were donating to people he thought they should be donating, I bet he wouldn't have a problem.
Exactly. Well, and this is what kind of, in some ways, I think this is the problem that most people who imagine a command and control economy really fall down, versus people who kind of see it from the bottom up, let 1,000 flowers bloom type of economy. And that's the idea that somebody from the top can make much better decisions than everybody else. When I think, hopefully, Cecil, from an economics perspective, that's just something economics shows us, is we get much better information and solutions from everybody participating in the process. Yeah. So,
It's just Jonah Goldberg is engaging in that same damn nonsense about the talented tent, the talented tent who can give all these nice, wonderful decisions for everybody else, and everybody will just fall in line, and everything will be nice and wonderful, and we're going to have this utopia. This is the same kind of elitism that have led us down that dark alley of socialism. That's what it is.
And it can lead on to the response to that becomes this nasty populism. That's what happens when you have the talented tit, or what was the thing? Creative class.
Yes.
There are people. So urban areas ought to try to attract the creative class. To hell with the poor people that were there. Let's get the creative class. Let's pay them a lot of money to come in and live in our cities, and that will revitalize it. And one of the proponents of that, to his credit, ended up saying, well, that didn't really work out so well. It did help the creative class, but it didn't help anybody else.
Anybody else, exactly. Yes.
And you kind of got to there's an egalitarian version of, classical liberalism, I think, is based upon the notion of equal rights and also equal dignity among people. That just because someone's got a PhD doesn't make them any smarter than somebody that just didn't get out of high school and got through the school of hard knocks. As a matter of fact, having a PhD and being surrounded most of my life with PhDs, I can attest to that. PhD just means piled higher and deeper, and you're persistent and stubborn. Doesn't have anything to do with wisdom. But no, I
defending the thesis at all costs.
Yeah, it's basically being able to be persistent enough to rag on people until they sign off. But after all said and done, I think there is something classical liberalism that's much more attractive in terms of its egalitarian appeal. It really is for equal dignity amongst people. That's the thing that matters. No classes, no groups, no races, nothing like that. Equal dignity amongst humankind. And both those on the right and those on the left often violate that. And what gets me is a lot of people on the left say they're for equality. Boy, they're the most elitist people I know.
Yes.
They're the smart ones that know what's going on. They're going to tell you what to do.
And this was kind of, that comment was kind of surprising coming from Jonah Goldberg, because Jonah Goldberg essentially was a guy of the right. A little bit of libertarianism, a little bit, not much, but he was a guy of the right. And then to hear him make a comment like this on CNN, Jesus Lord, I mean,
I was surprised to see that, because usually he's a fairly reasonable guy.
Yes.
But you realize, there is such a thing. I mean, I'm not a fan of Trump. I've never been for Trump, but there is such a thing as Trump derangement syndrome.
Yeah.
There are people, get up and just say anything that makes Trump look bad. It's crazy.
Yeah.
You don't need to say stuff. You don't need to say crazy things about Trump. He says enough for his own.
I did notice that Jonah was in studio, so maybe he drank a little of the Kool-Aid while he was there.
Oh, yes,
CNN.
A little too much. A little too much.
Well, Cecil, I think we're just about wrapped up, but did you have any last thoughts you'd like to leave the audience with, or, anything about, what you picked up over the lifetime of teaching economics, that some insight that you want to share with the audience?
Oh, gosh. I think there's certain tenets of economics and certain tenets of classical liberalism that really are timeless. They really don't change. We were talking about change early on and how institutions change, and they will, and laws are going to change and all that. But humankind desire for individual dignity, I think something that's there. You got to earn what you consume. You got to live within your means. There's certain timeless truths that I think ultimately are the things that save us, because there's no way you can get out of it. And again, there have been dark times for classical liberalism. The Mont Pelerin Society was founded in those dark times, but classical liberalism did come back. It may not come back in my lifetime. It may be these are 30-year, 50-year cycles. I don't know. But the idea of having a limited government that doesn't take an inordinate part of everybody's paycheck and allows people to live their lives as they see fit, I think it's an incredibly compelling vision. And I hope that's what my children and grandchildren get.
Indeed.
Well, that
Yes,
sounds like an
indeed.
excellent place to leave things off on. And for our audience, I want to thank you for joining us for another conversation and just how people like you are advancing liberty both in your area and across the country. Again, you can find a lot more conversations that we've had with people like Cecil on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, and Rumble. You can go check out some of our prior conversations. And until the next time, I'd like you to consider just what you can do in your community to try and advance the cause of liberty, and help people to remain free, because boy, I tell you, we need you more now than ever.
Yes.
So
Yes.
again, thanks for joining us. Until next time, stay tuned.
It was a
stay
joy,
free.
Jason. Nice to meet you, Leon. I hope to talk to
Same
you.
here. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, always and forever.
Thank you for listening to the Knuckleheads of Liberty podcast. Find us on Facebook, Rumble, YouTube, your favorite podcast network, and at knuckleheadsofliberty.com.